What if Daemon Targaryen was reborn as Jon Snow and claimed the Iron Throne? What if a soul could outlive its own death? What if the fire that burned through one man's veins did not gutter out on a rain-soaked field, but banked itself, patient as an ember beneath ash, waiting to be born again in the cold heart of a kingdom that had forgotten how to fear dragons? The boy who wakes in the gray hours before dawn at Winterfell does not yet have the words for what he is. He knows only the dreams. They come to him nightly now, and they do not fade the way ordinary dreams fade. They sharpen. A city of red stone rising above a bay, a throne of blackened swords, ugly and magnificent, and the seat of it warm with a power he can almost taste. A sword whose steel seemed to ripple like water in candlelight. A blade that felt more true to his hand than anything he has ever held in this small life. And a face, always a face, a younger man, golden and sad, a brother he never had, a brother he loved and hated in equal measure, a brother he abandoned and returned to, and abandoned again. Jon Snow tells no one. This is the first calculation, and it is instinctive. He is 6 years old the first time he understands, truly understands, that the memories are not his, and are entirely his. He lies still in the dark of the room he shares, with no true-born Stark, and he does the arithmetic of survival before he even knows he is doing it. A bastard boy in the north, who speaks of dragonfire and dead kings, would be called mad, or worse, he would be called a Targaryen sympathizer in the very castle whose lord had bent the knee to Robert Baratheon, whose family had bled to end the dragon dynasty. So the boy learns the oldest lesson the old soul ever knew. He learns to keep his own counsel. He learns that a secret is a kind of coin, and that a man who spends it foolishly is a man already ruined. In the training yard, however, the fire cannot be so easily hidden. Sir Roderick Cassel has trained boys for 40 years, and he knows the shape of natural talent when he sees it, and he knows too the shape of something else, something that unsettles him though he cannot name it. Jon Snow fights wrong, not clumsily, never that. The boy fights with a joy that does not belong to a child, a reckless and laughing aggression, as though combat were not a discipline to be mastered, but an old friend to be embraced. He presses forward when caution would counsel a step back. He grins through split lips. When he is knocked down, he rises faster than he should, and there is a light in his eyes that a master-at-arms sees perhaps 3 times in a lifetime, and each time it makes the hair rise on his arms. Ned Stark watches from the covered walk one gray morning and says nothing. He simply watches, his face still as northern stone, and inside him a quiet unease turns over like a sleeper who does not wish to wake. There is Lyanna in the boy's coloring. He tells himself this. He tells himself this is only Lyanna's fire, Lyanna's wildness, remembered in the child's blood. He does not let himself finish the thought that lives beneath it. He does not need to. He turns and walks back into the keep, and he resolves, as he has resolved 1,000 times, to say nothing of the boy's mother. But the boy hears things. This is the second lesson the old soul remembers, that a household is a web, and that everything spoken in it eventually travels along the threads to the one meant never to hear it. Jon hears the whispers of the serving women. He hears the guardsmen speculate. He hears, one autumn evening, 2 stable hands wondering aloud whether the Lord of Winterfell had ever truly been the sort of man to father a child on some tavern girl and then carry the shame home to his lady wife. And something in Jon Snow stirs at that, some buried instinct honed across a lifetime of reading men and their lies. He begins to notice the way his father's face closes whenever the subject of his mother arises. He begins to understand that a silence can be a wall built to hide a door. He does not confront his father. That would be the move of a fool. A piece advanced too far and too soon, exposed and easily taken. Instead, the boy watches. He waits. He files the observation away with all the others, patient, methodical, a mind decades older than the body that houses it. Catelyn Stark helps him, though she would be horrified to know it. Her coldness toward the bastard is total and unwavering, a chill that fills every room she shares with him. A different boy might have crumbled beneath it. A different boy might have grown small and desperate for scraps of affection. Jon does not. The old soul in him recognizes rejection for what it is, a form of politics, a woman defending the position of her own children against a threat to their inheritance. He does not resent her for it. He respects it, in a cold and distant way, the respect one player gives another who understands the stakes of the game. And so, alone, he becomes a student. He memorizes the names of the great houses and their sigils and their words. He learns which lords owe fealty to Winterfell and which owe grudges. He learns the history of the rebellion that put Robert on the throne, and he studies it not as a boy learning his letters, but as a general studying the field of a battle already fought, marking where the pieces stood and where they might have stood better. He watches the maester and the steward, and the way power flows through the castle, like water finding its level. By the time he is 12, Jon Snow has made himself a quiet promise, and it is not the promise of a bastard boy dreaming of glory. It is the cold vow of a man who has died once already, and does not intend to be exiled a second time. This life will end differently. He has decided it, and the deciding has only just begun. What if a boy of 12 could hold a sword as though he had been born with steel already in his hand, not fumbling toward mastery, not learning the shape of the blade, but remembering it? This is the question that hangs over the great hall on the night a visiting knight rides through the gates of Winterfell, dusted with the road and hungry for a warm hearth and a warmer welcome. Sir Willem of the Reach is a proud man, the way many knights are proud, which is to say, his pride is a thing worn openly and defended clumsily. Jon marks this within moments of the man's arrival. Pride, in a swordsman, is not a virtue. It is a lever, and Jon has spent 2 lifetimes learning where such levers sit and how gently they must be pulled. He does not challenge the knight directly. That would be crude, and crudeness invites suspicion. Instead, he offers a comment, quiet and almost admiring, about the difficulty of a certain thrust, the sort of thrust a man of Sir Willem's clear skill would surely find elementary. The knight, warmed by wine and the eyes of the hall upon him, laughs and says any green boy might learn such a thing given a season's practice. Jon lowers his gaze, as a bastard should, and murmurs that he has always wished to see it done properly, by a true knight, not the practice-yard fumbling of Winterfell's master-at-arms. The words are honey, and they are poison both. Sir Willem rises. The bargain is struck before either of them has named a single term. They fight in the yard beneath a bruised evening sky, blunted tourney swords in their hands, and the household gathers as households do when there is entertainment to be had. And what they witness is not a boy's clumsy flailing. Jon moves like water over stone. He does not meet the knight's strength with strength, because he has none to spare, and a boy who tries to overpower a grown man is a boy who ends the night in the mud. He borrows the knight's own force instead, turning each heavy blow aside and letting it carry Sir Willem a half step past where he meant to stand. He circles, He waits. He fights with the patient economy of a man who has killed in earnest and knows that flourish is a fool's currency. When the opening comes, and it comes because Jon has spent 5 minutes teaching the knight to expect a thing that will not happen, Jon takes it. The blunted point finds the gap beneath Sir Willem's arm, and the knight staggers, and it is over. The hall is silent for a heartbeat too long. Silence is the sound of people revising what they thought they knew. Later, in the cold quiet of a corridor, Ned Stark finds him. Ned is not an angry man, but there is a weight to him now, a stillness that is heavier than any shout. He tells Jon that no boy fights the way he fought tonight. He tells him that men remember such things, and that remembering leads to talking, and talking leads to questions, and questions are the one crop that grows best in soil like Jon's. "Temper your pride," Ned says, and there is something almost pleading beneath the command. Jon hears the true meaning underneath the spoken one. Do not make them look too closely at you. Do not give the realm a reason to wonder whose blood truly runs beneath the name Snow. Jon bows his head and accepts the rebuke, and inside the cold architecture of his mind, he files it away as intelligence. His father has fears. His father is guarding something. That too is a lever, though he does not yet know its shape. He goes down into the crypts that night, because the crypts are the one place in Winterfell where no one follows. Down among the stone kings and the iron swords laid across their laps, he speaks aloud to the dead Starks, as if seeking their counsel, as if their granite faces might soften into understanding. But the words that rise in his throat are not the words of the North. They come in Valyrian, that high and ancient tongue, syllables that taste of ash and old fire, and he speaks the names before he knows he means to. Vhagar, Caraxes, Meleys, the names of dragons long turned to bone. He speaks them the way a man speaks the names of the beloved dead, and standing there among the Stark kings who would have called him abomination, Jon Snow feels the two halves of himself fold quietly together and become one thing. Daemon's ambition, the boy's loyalty, one heart, one purpose, no longer at war. He does not weep. He simply accepts it, the way a man accepts the weight of his own hands. And yet acceptance does not make him cruel. This is the thing that surprises even the calculating part of him. He could hold the Starks at arm's length, treat them as instruments, as stepping stones toward the throne he means to claim. It would be simpler. It would be safer. But there is Robb, who shares his food and his laughter and never once looks at him as a thing beneath the family table. And there is Arya, wild and unwanted in her own quiet way, who sees in Jon the only kindred spirit in a castle full of proper folk. He finds, against the grain of every strategic instinct, that he loves them. And so he makes a different calculation. He will protect them, not despite his ambition, but folded into it. He will use what Daemon knew, the strength of Targaryen blood, the memory of dragons, the understanding of how power is truly seized, and he will bend it toward a destiny his old life was denied. But he will not spend the ones he loves to reach it. The seed of a claim to the Iron Throne takes root in him that night in the dark, patient and quiet, watered by grief and warmed by fire. He climbs back toward the light, and near the top of the crypt stair, he finds Robb waiting, torch in hand, his face full of questions he has not yet decided to ask. What if the man who came riding through the gates of Winterfell with his golden banners and his mountain of a body had once been something worth fearing? What if the king who claimed the Iron Throne by right of conquest was, to eyes that had watched true kings and true tyrants across a lifetime, Nothing more than a bloated warning of what happens when a warrior forgets he is meant to rule and not merely to win. Jon watches from the yard as Robert Baratheon dismounts. He watches the way the horse sags with relief when its burden departs, the way the king's breath comes in short heaving gusts after so brief an exertion, the way the fine cloth strains across a belly that once, perhaps, housed the muscle that shattered Rhaegar's chest on the trident, and something old and cold turns over inside the boy. Daemon had known men like this. Not this man, but this kind of man. The victor who mistakes the throne for a reward rather than a burden, who feasts and hunts and whores, while the realm rots quietly beneath him, who leaves the true work of governance to smaller and hungrier creatures, who will one day feed upon his corpse. A king should be feared or loved, ideally both. This one is neither. This one is pitied, and pity is the softest soil in which a usurpation may be undone. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing. I upload new stories every single day. Now, let's continue with the story. He does not smile. He keeps his bastard's face still and downcast, as he has learned to do. But behind that face, a ledger is being drawn, and every entry is written in the same hand it was written in 100 years before he was born. The Baratheon regime is a usurpation, not merely of a throne, but of blood, dragon blood, his blood, or so a growing certainty within him insists. And Jon Snow files the fat broken king away, as a problem already half solved by the king's own appetites. And he thinks, quiet and patient, that thrones are not held by those who win them. They are held by those who understand them. That night, the feast fills the great hall with noise and heat, and the reek of spilled wine. And Jon, kept from the high table as always, finds a use for his exile. From the shadows of the lower hall, he watches the southern party, the way a hawk watches a field. He marks the queen, cold and golden, her smile never once reaching her eyes when it falls upon her husband. He marks her brother, the small one, drinking and watching everything with the sharp gaze of a man who trusts nothing. And he marks the way Lord Eddard Stark's honest face tightens whenever a Lannister leans close, the way courtesy hardens into wariness, the way old grief moves behind his Lord Father's eyes like a fish beneath ice. Later, in a corridor between the hall and the guest chambers, Jon overhears more than he was meant to. Ned's voice, low and reluctant. Another voice, oiled and southern, speaking of the hand's office as though offering a gift with a hook inside it. Jon does not need the words. Daemon had sat through 1,000 such conversations, had spoken half of them himself, and he understands the shape of what is happening before the sentences are finished. The old hand is dead, suspiciously dead. The king wants Ned Stark to take his place, to come south, to walk into a nest of lions with nothing but his honor for armor. It is a trap, whether Robert knows it or not, and men who love their friends make the most useful bait. He finds Robb after, drawing him aside from the warmth and the wine into the cold of the yard, where their breath smokes in the torchlight. He tells him plainly what he has seen and what it means. He tells him the North must keep its strength close, that no southern promise of friendship should be trusted, that when their father rides south, and he will ride south, the wolf must not send its whole pack into the lion's mouth. Robb frowns, half laughing at the gravity in his brother's voice, half unsettled by it, for it is not a boy's voice at all. "Where did you learn to think like this?" Robb asks. Jon only says that he has had time to watch, and that watching teaches a man things he was never taught. Robb does not laugh again. Something in Jon's certainty lodges in him like a splinter, and he will remember these words later, in a hall gone red, when it is far too late to heed them. But there is one calculation Jon will not leave unmade. The Night's Watch has been raised as his path, spoken of as though it were the only door standing open to a bastard of no future. And Jon has decided that he will not walk through it. Not into a lifetime of celibate cold, guarding a wall against nothing, while his blood curdles into obscurity. He goes to find his father in the quiet after the feast, in the solar where the fire has burned low. He asks about his mother, not softly, not as a boy pleading for a kindness, but directly, the way one lord addresses another when the truth is owed. Who was she? Where does his blood run? And he watches, with the patience of a man who has broken stronger men than Eddard Stark across a table, the terror that blooms behind his father's eyes. Not anger, not shame, terror, the particular fear of a man guarding a secret whose weight could topple kingdoms. Ned's hand tightens on the arm of his chair. His answer is evasion wrapped in gentleness, a promise of when you are older, a wall thrown up in haste. And Jon understands. Not the whole of it, not yet, but enough. A bastard's mother is a matter of embarrassment, not fear. Only a truth worth killing for is guarded like this. His blood is high. Higher than a bastard's. Higher, perhaps, than the man who sits at Ned's own high table. The seed planted in the crypt drinks deep of this confirmation and hardens into resolve. And as he leaves the solar with his father's frightened eyes upon his back, Jon Snow begins, quietly, to forge a claim of his own. What if a man arrived at the end of the world not as the condemned, but as a general surveying the ground of his first campaign? The wall rises before him, 700 feet of ice against a sky the color of old iron. And where other boys see a tomb, Jon Snow sees a garrison. This is the difference between a soul that has lived once and a soul that has lived twice. The recruits who ride beside him hunch their shoulders against the cold and mourn the lives they have left behind. Jon does not mourn, he assesses. He counts the men on the ramparts, marks how few they are, notes the crumbling towers and the empty castles strung along the ice, like teeth fallen from a rotting jaw. The Night's Watch is not a wall of steel. It is a hollow thing, an institution that once commanded kings and now begs for scraps. And hollow things, he knows, can be filled. He does not resist the discipline, he drinks it. Where Daemon Targaryen once chafed at every constraint the Red Keep placed upon him, this new incarnation understands a truth the prince learned too late, that mastery of a system is the surest path to mastering the men within it. So he rises before the horn. He trains until his hands blister and then trains through the bleeding. He learns the names of the stewards and the rangers and the cooks, and he speaks to each as though the man before him mattered, because in the arithmetic, Jon is quietly assembling. Each man does. Sir Alliser Thorne mistakes him for arrogance and tries to break him in the yard. Jon lets himself be beaten. Once. Then he studies the master-at-arms the way a swordsman studies an opponent's tell, and the second time they cross blades, the older man finds himself flat on the frozen ground, and the boys who watched the humiliation of the first bout now watch the reversal of the second, and loyalty begins its slow migration toward the one who does not lose twice. He gathers them without seeming to gather, Gren, Pip, the lowborn and the discarded, the sons of no one, who have never in their lives had a highborn boy, look them in the eye and call them brother, and mean it as a soldier means it, rather than as a septon does. And Samwell Tarly, soft and terrified and useless with a blade, whom the others would have hazed into an early grave. Jon sees something in Sam the others cannot. Not a warrior, a library, a mind that has consumed the histories of the realm and retained them, a boy raised in a great house's archive who knows the shape of old lineages the way a ranger knows the shape of the land beyond the wall. And so, Jon protects him, and in protecting him, acquires him. The requests come gently, framed as idle curiosity, a bastard's harmless wondering. Tell me, Sam, of the old Valyrian customs. Tell me of the doctrine of exceptionalism, the argument the Septons swallowed to let dragons wed their own blood and stand above the laws that bound lesser men. Tell me how a claim is made, and unmade, and remade. Sam, delighted to be useful, delighted to be asked, descends into the maester's records and the mildewed tomes, and returns with answers he does not understand the purpose of. He does not see the shape of what he is building. He sees a friend with a scholar's appetite. He does not see that he is forging, letter by letter and precedent by precedent, the scaffolding of a claim to the Iron Throne. Jon commits it all to memory, the bastardy that Aegon the Conqueror's own house set aside when it suited them, the exceptions carved into holy law for those whose blood ran hot enough to demand it, ammunition catalogued and stored for a war that has not yet declared itself. Then the raven comes. It comes as such news always comes, without ceremony, a rider from the south and a whisper that spreads through the common hall before the words are fully spoken. Eddard Stark is dead, named a traitor, beheaded on the steps of Baelor's Sept by a boy king's command, his head struck from his shoulders before a jeering crowd. And the man who was Daemon Targaryen feels the old fire kindle behind his ribs, the sister's rage, the fury that once drove him to draw steel in a throne room over a slight. His father, the man who raised him, who lied to him to keep him alive, who guarded the secret of his blood with terror in his eyes, dead, and for the length of a single held breath. Jon Snow is only a grieving son, and the grieving son wants to take a horse and ride south and burn the Red Keep to the foundation stones. He does not. This is the hinge on which two lives turn, and the older soul seizes the reins of the younger's grief before it can bolt. He watches, in his mind's eye, the desertion that a lesser Jon Snow might have chosen, the lone rider on the King's Road, the black cloak marking him for every hedge knight and gold cloak between here and the capital, the pointless death in some nameless field, the claim extinguished before it was ever spoken aloud. He sees it, and he rejects it, because a man who has already thrown one life away on a single reckless swing of a sword will not squander the second the same way. Grief is a fire. Fire can be wasted, or fire can be forged into a blade. So he goes not to the stables but to the men. He finds Gren and Pip and the others, and he does not weep before them. He lets them see him master the weeping, which is a far more powerful thing. He goes among the wildling captives kept in the ice cells, the free folk who bow to no southern lord, and he speaks to them, not as prisoners, but as future subjects who have simply not yet understood their place in the design. He begins, that very night, with his father's blood not yet cold on the Sept steps, to bind them all to himself. The Watch, the wildlings, swords that do not yet know whose war they will fight. What if the surest way to command men who have never bowed to a king is to offer them not a crown, but a door out of the cold, a door through the great wall that has kept them penned in the dying north for 1,000 generations? This is the calculation Jon Snow makes as he crosses the frozen frontier toward the camp of Mance Rayder, and it is a calculation that no true son of House Stark would ever have permitted himself to make. The Starks, saw the free folk as raiders, as savages, as an enemy to be repelled at the gate. Jon sees them differently. He sees an army that has already been assembled, already armed, already hardened by a life that would kill any southern soldier in a fortnight. He sees swords that are being wasted on the wrong war. Mance Rayder is a man who was once a brother of the Watch himself, and so he knows the weight of an oath and the cost of breaking one. He receives Jon in a tent that smells of wood smoke and old furs, and he studies the young man across the fire the way a gambler studies a card he cannot yet see. He expects threats. He expects the tired old song of the crow, who has come to tell the wildlings to disperse or die. What he does not expect is honesty. Jon does not speak of glory. He speaks of the dead. He tells Mance what is coming down from the far north, the thing that gathers strength in the long dark, the enemy that does not tire and does not bleed and does not stop. He speaks of it not as a legend from a nurse's tale, but as a military fact, a force with numbers and momentum, and a single, unyielding objective. And here is the turn of the blade. Every lord before him has demanded that the free folk fight and die at the wall for grudges older than memory. Jon offers the opposite. He offers to open the gate. He offers land in the north, safe passage south, a place for their children behind stone rather than in front of it. In exchange, he asks only for their spears when the war for the living begins. It is an unprecedented bargain. It is also a masterstroke, because it reframes Jon not as another southern lord, but as the one man who refuses to let them die for the quarrels of the dead. Mance weighs it. He weighs the pride of a people who have never knelt against the arithmetic of survival, and the arithmetic wins, as it so often does. He does not embrace the alliance so much as he surrenders to its logic. When Jon rides back toward the wall, he rides with something no Lord Commander in the long history of the Watch has ever possessed: the promise of the free folk at his back. But an alliance forged in the wilderness must survive the politics of the castle. And here the design grows more delicate. The Night's Watch is not a single blade but a bundle of them, some sharp with loyalty, some rusted with resentment. Jon has won many of the brothers already. He has won Gren with his courage, and Pip with his humor, and Dolorous Ed with the simple fact that he never asks a man to walk a path he will not walk first. He has bled beside them on the parapets. He has held the northern gate when others would have fled. Leadership, for Jon, is not a title conferred, but a debt accumulated, and he collects loyalty the way a lender collects interest, patiently, relentlessly, until the men owe him more than they can ever repay. Yet the same qualities that bind the young to him drive the old away. The traditionalists see a boy remaking a 1,000-year institution in the span of a single winter. They see wildlings invited through the wall the ancestors built to keep them out. They see a Lord Commander who speaks of the Iron Throne in his sleep and of dragons in his waking hours. To them, he is not a savior. He is a betrayer wearing the black cloak of a brother, and betrayal, in the frozen dark, is answered with steel. The attempt comes at night, as such things always do. Blades in the shadows, faces half familiar, brothers who believe they are saving the Watch by ending the man who would transform it. But Jon Snow has died once already, and a man who has tasted death twice moves through the world with a caution the untested cannot imagine. He is ready. He has always been ready. The assassins strike, and the strike fails, and by the time the courtyard fills with torchlight, the plotters are dead or fleeing, and Jon stands over them, breathing hard, alive, and stronger than he was an hour before. For the failed blow does what no speech could. It divides the watch cleanly into those who follow him and those who fear him, and the fearful he now knows exactly by name. He does not celebrate, he calculates. He understands that the wound in the brotherhood will not close, only scar, and that he must build his true power elsewhere before the scar tears open again. And so his mind travels, as it has been traveling for weeks, across the narrow sea, because the war beyond the wall has taught him a truth that the war for the throne will only confirm. He has stood upon the ridge and watched the pale eyes gather in the tree line. He has seen a blade of ordinary steel shatter against a foe that ordinary steel cannot touch. He has felt in his own bones the limit of swords and men and stone walls. There is only one power in all the world that can burn the dead and melt an iron chair alike. Only one weapon that answers both the winter and the throne with the same fire. Dragons. The word settles in him like a stone dropping into still water, spreading outward, changing everything. He turns from the wall, from the smoking pyres, from the divided brothers, and he begins, quietly, to make his plans for the East. The rumor comes, not as a proclamation, but as a whisper, the way all dangerous things arrive in the North. A trader from White Harbor tells it to a sellsword, who tells it to a wildling, who tells it in the mead hall over the crackle of a fire that has burned too low. There is a girl in the East, a silver-haired girl who walked into a funeral pyre and walked out of it unburned, a girl who freed the slave cities and broke the chains of Astapor and Yunkai, who calls herself by a dozen names, each grander than the last, and behind her, circling the ruined pyramids of a foreign city, 3 living dragons. Jon hears the tale in fragments, and he does not react. He never reacts. He stares into the fire as the words settle, and inside him the man who was Daemon Targaryen goes very still, the way a hunter goes still when he glimpses movement in the trees. Daenerys, his brother's daughter in the arithmetic of the old life, his aunt in the twisted geometry of this one, blood of his blood, ash of his ash. And the thing that stirs in his chest is not simple. It is 2 things braided tightly together, and he has lived long enough in 2 lifetimes to name them both: kinship and rivalry. Because a dragon queen with 3 dragons is either the greatest ally a claimant could dream of, or the single greatest obstacle standing between him and the chair he intends to take. There is no third possibility. There is no arrangement in which 2 Targaryens with fire in their veins simply share the world between them and never look sideways at one another. He knows this because he was there when Targaryens turned on Targaryens, when brother put brother to the flame, when the dance of the dragons drank half a dynasty. He knows it the way one knows the shape of an old scar in the dark. So the question is not whether she is a threat. The question is how to reach her before she becomes one. He composes the letter himself, by candlelight, in a hand disguised to look like a maester's practiced script. He writes nothing that a Lannister spy could turn into a noose. He writes instead a riddle. He references a thing that no living soul outside the dragon's blood should know, a childhood word, a private name, a fragment of history buried so deep that only one who carried the memory of a Targaryen could have unearthed it. He does not sign it. He does not claim a throne. He does not beg. He offers, in coded lines, a single unmistakable truth wrapped in shadow. You are not the last. You are not alone. There is another who remembers. It is a wager, and he knows it. He is gambling that when the letter reaches her, curiosity will do what threats never could. that she will read those words and feel the ground shift beneath her, feel the loneliness that all last of their kind carry, and want, more than anything, to know who else in all the wide world speaks the language of her blood. He is gambling that shared blood buys leverage, that she will meet him as a partner, an equal, a fellow flame, rather than reaching for him as a subject to be summoned to heal. Everything depends on that distinction. Everything. He chooses the man to carry it with the same care he chose the words. Not a lord, not a name anyone watches. A quiet, forgettable writer with a plain face and a talent for going unremembered. Jon presses the sealed parchment into his hands in the cold before dawn and gives him a route that avoids every eye that matters. The man does not know what he carries. That, too, is deliberate. A courier who cannot betray the message is a courier who cannot be broken. And then he lets it go. He watches the rider dwindle down the southern road until the white swallows him, and he turns back to the more immediate game, the one played daily within arm's reach. Because while his eyes look east, his hands must never leave the pieces close at hand. There is Stannis, grim and rigid, and burning through his small store of coin and men, who believes Jon owes him fealty and a name and a castle he was offered. There are the northern lords, proud and wounded and hungry for a leader who is not a stranger from Dragonstone. There is the Watch, fractured by his choices, watching him with equal parts loyalty and fear. And there are the free folk, tens of thousands of them now south of a wall they spent 1,000 years trying to breach, bound to him by nothing but the memory of who let them through. 4 factions, 4 blades, and Jon holds each of them by a thread that only he can see. He commits to none of them. That is the whole of his art. To Stannis, he offers counsel and cautious courtesy, never a knee, never a refusal, always the suggestion that his help is coming, one concession away. To the northern lords he speaks of stark blood and old loyalties, letting them believe he is theirs while promising nothing they can hold him to. To the Watch, he plays the dutiful commander, and to the free folk, he plays the only southerner who ever kept his word. Each faction looks at him and sees a man they need. Not one of them sees a man who needs them. That is the trick. That is the whole trick of it. To be indispensable to everyone and beholden to no one. To stand at the center of every calculation while remaining, himself, uncalculated. He becomes, quietly and without any of them quite noticing the moment it happened, the single point upon which the entire North turns. He does not tell them why. He does not tell them of the letter riding south, or the dragons burning in the east, or the chair of black iron that fills his sleep. He lets them believe he fights for survival, for the Watch, for the living against the dead. And far to the south, on a narrow road he will never see, his rider crests a hill and turns his horse toward the sea, carrying 11 lines of coded truth toward a queen who does not yet know she has a rival. What if a war could not be won in a single stroke, but only in 100 small ones, each of them paid for in blood and in patience? This is the war Jon fights now, and it teaches him what no easy victory ever could. He does not sweep down upon Winterfell in a single glorious charge. He gathers. He waits. He counts. The counting begins in the dead of winter, when the roads are choked with snow, and the Boltons sit warm behind stone walls, believing themselves secure. Jon understands their belief, and he understands too that belief is the first thing a besieger must dismantle. He rides to the mountain clans first, to the Wolves and the Norries and the Littles, hard men who measure a lord not by his blood, but by whether he will bleed beside them. He eats their coarse bread and sleeps on their cold floors and asks them for nothing until they offer it themselves. That is the calculation beneath the humility. A man who begs is refused. A man who waits is followed. From the clans he turns to Bear Island, where Lady Maige's daughters keep their grief sharp as any blade, and to the scattered loyalists who fled Winterfell when the flayed man rose above its towers. And then, most dangerous of all, to the free folk, whom no southern lord would ever call soldiers, and whom Jon calls exactly that, because he needs the numbers, and because he has learned that a man beyond the wall values loyalty more than any king ever did. He binds them all together, not with promises, but with a shared enemy, and the enemy serves him well. The campaign that follows is not brilliant. That is the point of it, the thing that matters more than any single battle. Jon takes losses. He loses men to cold and to hunger, and to Bolton arrows loosed from behind palisades he cannot yet breach. He wins a village and loses it back within the fortnight. He learns the terrible arithmetic of a besieger, that every mile advanced must be held, that every victory costs more than it yields until the very last one. Robb had been the young wolf, brilliant and doomed, winning every battle and losing the war. Jon watches himself become the opposite. He loses battles and wins ground. He endures. And endurance, in the end, is what breaks the Boltons. Not genius, not a single reckless gamble. Grinding, patient, relentless pressure, until the men behind those walls begin to desert, until the flayed banners come down one by one, until the gates of Winterfell open not to a conqueror's charge, but to a besieger who simply would not leave. When Jon finally walks into the great hall of his forefathers, there is no cheering. There are only tired men who followed a tired man because he never once turned back. He stands beneath the cold vaulted stone where Ned Stark once sat in judgment, and he lets the silence gather around him like snow. Then he calls to him Sam, and a handful of lords whose loyalty he has weighed and measured through 100 frozen nights, and he tells them the thing that Ned Stark carried to his grave. He is not Ned's bastard. He is Lyanna's son, and Rhaegar's, born in a tower of Dorne while the realm burned, hidden beneath a lie, because a lie was the only shield an infant king could wear. Ice and fire, joined in his blood before he ever drew breath. The lords stare at him. Sam, who already suspected, who found the truth in the yellowed pages of an old Septon's diary, only nods and looks at his boots. Watch the calculation move behind Jon's gray eyes as he watches theirs. He has not told them this to unburden himself. Nothing he does is done to unburden himself. He has told them because a bastard may reclaim a keep, but only a prince may claim a throne, and he means to claim far more than Winterfell. The revelation is not a confession, it is a move. But the board does not respond as he intends. The northern lords, who came to follow a Stark, hear the word Targaryen and grow still in a way that has nothing to do with reverence. These are men whose fathers marched south under Robert's banner to break the dragons forever. These are men who buried sons at the Trident and the Tower of Joy, killing the very house Jon now names as his own. Lord Glover's hand tightens on the pommel of his sword. Old Lord Serwyn will not meet his eyes. The silence that had been weary curdles into something colder, and Jon feels the ground he spent a winter winning begin to shift beneath his boots. He does not raise his voice. That is the first lesson of oratory, that a man who must shout has already lost. He speaks, instead of the snow they marched through together, of the men they buried, Of the walls they took not for a dragon, but for the wolf whose halls these are. He reminds them that Lyanna Stark was their own, that her blood runs as northern as any river beneath the ice, and that the babe she died to protect was raised on porridge and frost, and the words of the old gods, not on Valyrian steel and dreams of conquest. A dragon, yes, but a dragon born in the snow, weaned on the north, loyal to it in his marrow, their dragon. He offers them not a foreign king, but a native son with a birthright large enough to shelter them all. And slowly, grudgingly, in the way that hard men yield only what cannot be withheld, the hall begins to turn. It is Lord Wool who speaks first, growling that he cared nothing for who sired the boy, so long as the boy would lead them south to settle old debts. One by one the others follow, some kneeling, some merely nodding, all of them binding themselves to a cause that has grown, in a single winter afternoon, far larger than a besieged castle in the snow. Jon looks out over their bowed heads. The north is his, and to the south, unknowing, a throne of black iron waits. What if the fastest way to lose a war for the living was to win the wrong argument at the wrong moment? Jon understands this even as the ship carries him south across the narrow sea, understands it in the marrow of a soul that has crossed the stepstones 100 times in a life that was not this one. He stands at the prow, with the wind pulling at his dark hair, and he calculates. He must convince a woman who has spent her entire existence believing the Iron Throne is her destiny, that the throne is a footnote, that the true war is a thing of cold and silence marching down from the top of the world. It is not an argument he can win with fear. It is not an argument he can win with proof, for he carries none she will believe. It is an argument he must win the way one wins any war worth fighting, patiently, piece by piece. Dragonstone rises from the sea like a fist of black stone, and when Jon climbs its long steps, he is measured by every eye in the fortress. He does not look like a king. He looks like a northern soldier in dark wool, weathered and unadorned, and the contrast serves him better than silk would. When he enters the great hall and sees her seated upon the carved throne of her ancestors, silver-haired and rigid with the certainty of one who has bent cities to her will, something ancient in him stirs. He has known this face before. Not hers, but the shape of it, the blood that made it. They speak, and it is not a conversation. It is a duel. She reminds him of her titles, and he lets her finish them all. She speaks of her fleet, her armies, her 3 dragons, and he listens the way a patient man listens to a river run its course. When at last she asks him to bend the knee, he does not refuse, and he does not accept. Instead, he speaks of old Valyria. He speaks of the freehold before the doom, of the 40 families and their bickering pride, of the way dragon lords bred their beasts and their bloodlines with equal calculation. He speaks of things no bastard raised in the north could know, of the sound the great furnaces made, and the taste of the ash on the wind, and he speaks of them not as legend, but as memory. Daenerys goes still. She has spent her life as the last of something, and here is a man reciting the intimacies of her lost world as though he had walked its streets. It unnerves her. He watches it unnerve her, and he does not press. He simply lets the silence work. For weeks it goes on like this. He does not demand her crown, and she does not demand his knee, and between them, the true war circles like a slow tide. He tells her of the White Walkers, of the Night King, of an army that does not tire and does not fear and grows with every death it deals. She does not believe him. Of course she does not. She has enemies she can see. thrones she can seize, a war she has waited her whole life to fight. What is a story of ice demons against the crown of 7 kingdoms? He does not argue with her disbelief. He plants it and lets it sit and returns to it, again and again, the way a besieger returns to the same weak stretch of wall. And then Rhaegal changes everything. The green dragon has watched Jon from the cliffs since his arrival, and when Jon walks toward it, across the black rock with his hand outstretched, the beast lowers its vast head instead of raising it. There is no fear in Jon. There is only the old certainty of a soul that has ridden dragons before, that knows the language beneath language, the pact between rider and beast that has no words. He climbs onto Rhaegal's back, and when the dragon takes to the sky above Dragonstone, the whole realm shifts on its axis in a single afternoon. Word travels the way only impossible things travel. A second dragon rider, a living dragon accepting a man who was, until yesterday, a northern usurper of doubtful blood. The story that Jon Snow is Aegon Targaryen, that Rhaegar's son lives and rides, ceases to be a rumor whispered in taverns and becomes a thing the small folk speak of as certainty. Dragons do not carry pretenders. Dragons know their own. Overnight, the perception of him hardens from a bastard playing at kingship into the flesh and blood proof of an ancient bloodline, and his claim swells to a size that alarms every advisor in Daenerys's council. Tyrion sees it first. He sees it the way he sees everything, at an angle, calculating the cost. A man who rides a dragon and holds the north and carries the trueborn claim is not an ally. He is a rival, wearing the mask of one. Varys sees it too, and behind his quiet eyes, he begins the endless recalculation that is his life's only true labor. Daenerys watches Jon land, watches the small folk of her own fortress stare at him with the awe they once reserved for her alone, and something cold moves through her chest that she does not name. But the war beyond the wall does not wait for her jealousy, and so an alliance is forged. It is not a marriage of trust. It is a marriage of necessity, each of them believing, in the private chambers of their own strategy, that they can shape the other once the dead are dealt with. She thinks she will bend him after. He thinks the same of her. Neither says this aloud. Neither needs to. They stand together on the black cliffs, with the dragons circling above them, 2 Targaryen souls bound by blood and divided by everything else, and they agree to march north. And far away, past the wall of ice at the edge of the world, the cold has already begun to move, and the first of the fallen have opened their blue and burning eyes. What if the greatest army the living had ever assembled was still not enough? This is the question that haunts every commander who rides north through the frozen dark. And it is the question Jon Snow refuses to answer aloud, because he has already answered it in the only way that matters. Not enough is a beginning, not a conclusion. Not enough is a number to be corrected by will and blood, and the willingness to spend both. And so the combined host of the North, of Daenerys, of the Vale and the Free Folk, and the sellswords bought with dragon gold, moves across the white silence like a single dark thought, and at its head rides a man who was once called the Rogue Prince, and now answers only to a bastard's name. He does not lead from the rear. This is the first thing the soldiers notice, and it is the thing they will remember longest. Kings and would-be kings command from the high ground, from the reserve, from the position that keeps them alive to command again tomorrow. Daemon Targaryen understood this arithmetic better than most men who ever lived. He also understood something the cautious never grasp. Men do not die for a voice that shouts from behind them. They die for a shape they can see ahead of them, moving into the same dark they are afraid to enter. So Jon spends his safety like coin he has no intention of saving. The dead come in numbers that break the mind's ability to count them. They come as a tide, as a flood, as the very landscape itself rising up on 10,000 ruined legs. And where the line of the living wavers, a shadow of green fire passes overhead, and the whites burn in a long screaming furrow. Rhaegal descends into the heart of the horde. This is madness. This is precisely the kind of madness that becomes legend, because the men on the ground look up and see their commander diving into the one place no sane leader would go, and the chant begins somewhere in the left flank and spreads like the fire itself. His name, over and over, hurled at the darkness as a weapon. He hears it. He does not smile. He is calculating. Because Jon knows what Daemon never had the chance to learn. He knows that memory alone does not win this war. All the battles he carried across the Vale of One Death, all the wars fought in the Stepstones and above King's Landing, all the centuries of a warrior's instinct pressed into a young man's skull, none of it teaches him how to kill a thing that cannot be stabbed or burned or reasoned with. For that, he needs the others. He needs Bran, whose eyes are open in a place beyond his body, tracing the Night King's movement across the field, like a hand moving a single piece across a board of ice. He needs Melisandre, whose fire holds back the dark long enough for the strike to be prepared. And he needs Arya. Above all, he needs Arya, the girl no one watches, the shadow that even the dead cannot smell coming, moving unseen through the chaos toward a target every army in the world has failed to reach. This is the great humility buried inside Jon's ambition, and it is the thing that makes him dangerous. He accepts that he cannot do this alone. Daemon could never have accepted it. Daemon believed in the dragon, in the sword, in the singular brilliance of one man's will imposed upon the world. Jon has died and been reborn and learned the lesson death teaches. No man is the whole board. And so when the moment comes, he does not reach for glory. He reaches for coordination. He holds the Night King's attention with fire and terror and the roar of a dragon in the dark, drawing every dead eye toward the sky, toward the spectacle, toward himself. He makes himself the loudest thing on the field. He makes himself bait. And in the silence beneath the spectacle, a girl with a dagger of dragonglass steps out of nowhere at all. There is a sound when it ends, or rather, there is the absence of sound, the sudden collapse of 10,000 animate corpses into scattered bone and stillness, the wind returning to a battlefield that a heartbeat ago was screaming. The living stand where they fell, uncertain, waiting for the dark to prove itself a lie. It holds. The dawn, when it comes, is real, and every man who survives that night carries the same story home, and every telling of it places Jon Snow at the burning center of the sky, and no telling of it, not one, places Daenerys Targaryen anywhere the small folk care to remember. This is the wound that will not heal. She fought. Her dragons burned. Her armies bled. But legends are not built from ledgers, and the people do not divide their love in proportion to sacrifice. They give it whole, to one shape, to one name, and the name is not hers. She feels the shift the way a monarch feels a throne cool beneath them. Something is leaving. Something is moving toward him and away from her, and she cannot stop it any more than she could have stopped the tide of the dead, because it is a tide of its own, made of a thing more powerful than fire. It is made of belief. The common enemy is gone. This is the truth that settles over the war camp as the pyres burn the fallen, and both of them understand it in the same silent instant. For one long season, they were allies because a wall of ice demanded it. That wall has fallen. The reason they stood together has ended. And now, there is only the game, the old game, the endless game, and only 2 players left at the board, with the strength to truly play it. 2 Targaryens, 1 throne. She looks at him, across the ashes and the melting snow, and he meets her eyes, and neither of them speaks. They do not need to. The war for the dawn is won. The other war, the quieter one, the one that will decide everything, has only just begun. What if the war that decides the fate of Westeros is fought not with dragons, but with patience? What if the deadliest weapon in this contest is neither flame nor steel, but the slow accumulation of loyalties, each lord bought or won or reasoned into alignment, until one dragon simply has more of the realm behind them than the other? The pyres burn for days. The dead are many, and the living move among them, with the hollow, drifting motion of those who have survived something they did not expect to survive. Grief is a strange currency in a war camp. It softens some men and hardens others, and Jon watches carefully to see which men are which. This is what Daemon understood long ago, in another life, seated at another council table beneath another crown. Grief is the moment before allegiance shifts. A man who has lost everything is a man looking for something to believe in, and Jon, who wears the face of a bastard and the soul of a prince, gives them something to believe in simply by standing still while others crumble. Daenerys comes to him on the 3rd day. She does not send a raven. She does not summon him to her tent. She walks the length of the camp herself, past the smoldering ash, past the wounded and the weeping, and she finds him at the edge of the field where the last of the fires have burned low. She speaks of the agreement. She reminds him of the words spoken when the alliance was forged, the words that bound the North to her cause, the promise that he would bend the knee when the dead were beaten back. She says these things not as a plea but as a queen reciting a debt owed, and she watches his face for the flicker of a man about to yield. The flicker does not come. Instead, he speaks of the realm. He speaks of what the people have seen and what they have chosen, and he does it gently, with the practiced softness of a man who knows that gentleness cuts deeper than anger. He tells her that a crown given by conquest sits uneasy, and that a crown given by belief cannot be taken away, and that the lords of Westeros do not fear him the way they fear her. He does not say the word foreign. He does not need to. It hangs in the air between them, unspoken and undeniable, because Daemon learned long ago that the sharpest truths are the ones you let your enemy assemble for themselves. She hears it. Of course she hears it. She has spent her whole life being called the foreign queen, the exile, the girl across the sea, and she knows precisely what he is doing, and this is what makes the moment so dangerous. 2 players who see the board equally. 2 minds that calculate at the same depth. When one player can predict the other perfectly, there is no deception left. There is only strength and the willingness to use it. They part without bloodshed. This is not mercy. This is arithmetic. Neither can afford to strike first, because the one who strikes first becomes the kinslayer, the oathbreaker, the villain in the tale, and both of them understand that the war they are about to fight will be won in the songs sung afterward as much as on any field. So they draw the lines quietly. They smile at the feasts. They toast the fallen together, and beneath the table, the game moves. The envoys begin to arrive within the week. They come at night, cloaked and hooded, riding the narrow roads under moonlight, and they come from places Jon did not expect. Northern lords, of course, who never wanted to serve a queen from across the sea. But then houses of the Vale, and then the Riverlands, and then, most tellingly, whispers from the stony reaches of Dorne and the fertile hearts of the Reach, where great lords weigh their fortunes with the cold precision of merchants. Each of them comes with the same unspoken question: which dragon will rise? And Jon receives them the way Daemon once received supplicants at the small council, with a listener's patience and a schemer's memory, giving each man the impression that he alone has been trusted, that he alone holds a special place in the coming order. He burns the letters after he reads them. He watches the wax curl and blacken in the candle flame, watches the seals of great houses dissolve into nothing, because a coalition built in secret must leave no trace until it is ready to reveal itself all at once. This is the lesson of a lifetime spent in courts. You do not announce your strength, you gather it in silence, and you let your rival believe she stands taller than she does, and then, on the day of your choosing, you let the truth land like a hammer. To the eye of the camp, he remains loyal. He calls her his queen. He kneels in council, a small kneeling, a courtesy, and he lets the southern lords watch him kneel, so that they might understand what it costs him and resent it on his behalf. Every gesture is calculated, every silence is chosen. The facade of loyalty is not a lie to protect himself. It is a weapon to unmake her, because a queen, betrayed by her own heir, tells a very different story than a rebel who declared himself from the start. She knows. This is the thing that gnaws at her in the long nights. She knows precisely what he is doing, and she cannot prove it, and she cannot move against it without becoming the tyrant her enemies have always claimed she is. She has 3 dragons, and an army, and a righteous claim, and none of it matters against a man who will not fight her openly, a man who simply lets the realm turn toward him, like flowers turning toward the sun. And so she makes her decision. If she cannot outmaneuver him in the shadows, she will force the contest into the light. She summons her advisors in the dark before dawn, her jaw set, her purple eyes hard as amethyst, and she tells them she intends to march south, to King's Landing, to claim the throne itself and make him choose. Openly, before them all. She does not know he has already begun to count the swords that will not follow her there. What if the surest way to steal a crown were not to seize it, but to be seen refusing to take it by force? This is the question Jon Snow carries south with him as the great host winds down from the north. And it is the question that shapes every word he speaks to Daenerys in the days before King's Landing comes into view. He does not oppose her march. He embraces it. He tells her that a joint assault is wise, that the Golden Company entrenched behind those ancient walls must be broken by dragons and men working in concert, that Cersei Lannister will not yield until the city itself is threatened. All of this is true, and all of it is calculated, because what he is truly planning is something Daenerys cannot see, even as she nods her assent across the war table. He intends to be the one who delivers the decisive blow, not her. He intends the realm to remember, when the smoke clears, whose dragon flew above the breach, whose hand stayed the worst of it, whose name the survivors will speak with something other than terror. The siege begins as sieges do, with position and patience, with the slow tightening of a noose around a city that does not yet believe it can fall. Cersei watches from the Red Keep with the cold certainty of a woman who has survived every reckoning that was meant to end her. The Golden Company mans the walls. The Iron Fleet crowds the bay bristling with scorpions, built to kill what flies. And into this Jon rides Rhaegal each dawn, green wings against a pale sky. And here is where the design he has kept hidden begins to reveal its shape. he does not burn. Where Daenerys would scorch the outer districts to clear a path, Jon banks his dragon and holds his fire, and he sends riders under banners of parley to the gates of the poor quarters, offering the small folk safe passage out before the fighting reaches them. He flies low over the fleeing columns, not to threaten, but to shield, placing Rhaegal between the frightened masses and the scorpion bolts that would cut them down. He risks himself, repeatedly. Foolishly, some of his own captains mutter, because a bolt through a wing, or through the man upon it, ends everything. And to what purpose? To spare peasants who will kneel to whoever wins regardless. They do not understand. He knows they do not understand, and he lets them grumble, because the muttering of ambitious men is a small price for the thing he is purchasing with every stayed flame. He is buying the memory of a city. He is buying the story that will be told in every tavern and on every corner for a generation. The dragon of the north came, and he did not burn us. He came, and he shielded our children from the bolts. This is worth more than 1,000 swords, because 1,000 swords can be bought and betrayed. But a story that lives in the mouths of the people cannot be unmade by any lord or any coin. Some of his supporters accuse him openly now of prolonging the war, of drawing out the suffering through his mercy, of letting Cersei catch her breath behind walls that a single hard assault would have broken. He hears them. He does not argue. He knows precisely how long the war will last, and he knows it will end at the moment he chooses, in the manner he chooses, and not 1 hour before. And then the walls break. The Golden Company, which held together in the field, does not hold at the breach, and the bells of the city begin to ring surrender, spilling out over the rooftops in a bronze tide that should mean the end. Cersei's soldiers throw down their spears. The gates hang open. The city is offered up whole, its people alive, its stones intact. Everything that Jon has spent weeks purchasing with restraint now delivered into open hands. This is the moment. This is the hinge upon which the entire march has turned. And Daenerys, circling above on Drogon with the fires of her whole broken life burning behind her eyes, does not hear the bells as surrender. She hears them as mockery. She hears every betrayal she has swallowed, every ally who turned toward the man beside her. Every night she lay awake, knowing she could not prove what she knew, and she lowers Drogon toward the packed streets with murder gathering in her throat. Jon sees it. He has been watching for it, because he has always known this moment would come, has known it since the north, has counted on it the way a man counts on the sun to rise. He drives Rhaegal upward and across, placing his dragon in the space between Drogon and the helpless masses below, and he screams her name into the wind. Not a plea, a command. For one suspended heartbeat, the two dragons hang there above a city holding its breath, and the whole of the realm's future balances upon whether a grieving queen will burn through her own kin to reach the throats of the innocent. She does not, whether it is love or exhaustion or the sudden unbearable clarity of what she is about to become in the eyes of every soul watching from the walls and the streets and the ranks of both armies. Drogon rises. The fire does not fall. And in that instant, the tide of every heart in King's Landing turns, decisively and forever, toward the man on the green dragon who placed himself between them and the flame. When the city finally falls, it falls not to the queen who conquered it, but to the mercy that spared it. The small folk pour into the streets speaking his name. His own doubting captains fall silent, and Daenerys, landing Drogon in the ash-flecked yard of the Red Keep she has crossed the world to claim, finds that she has taken the throne and lost the realm in the very same hour, and she turns to look for Jon and finds him already surrounded by kneeling men. What if a throne could be won and lost in the same breath, not by the sword, but by the silence that follows it? This is the question the men around Jon Snow are already answering, though none of them speak it aloud. They watch him from their knees, and they calculate. Tyrion Lannister, standing apart in the ruined yard with his hands folded before him, understands the shape of what has just happened better than anyone. He has spent his whole life reading rooms, and this room is the entire realm. The small folk have chosen, the armies have chosen, and a hand who once counseled a queen now finds himself weighing a colder arithmetic. Which of two Targaryens can hold what has been taken? He does not decide it in that hour. He decides it the moment the fire did not fall. Varys arrives at the same conclusion by a different road, as he always does. For the spider, there is no love in this, no wounded loyalty, only the single question he has asked of every ruler he has ever served. Is this the one who is good for the realm? He has whispered that question into the dark for decades, and he has watched claimant after claimant fail it. But here is a man with Targaryen blood and a Stark name, a man who spared a city he could have burned, a man whose legitimacy runs through the north and the south, both like two rivers meeting. Varys does not need to conspire. He needs only to allow. And so, in quiet corners of the Red Keep, over cups of wine that no one drinks, the shift begins. Not a rebellion, a tilting, the subtle redistribution of weight from one Targaryen to another. Daenerys feels it before she can name it. She sits in the great hall she has crossed the world to claim, and she is more alone than she has ever been. Her unsullied stand at the doors, faithful and silent. Drogon coils in the yard beyond, restless, but the men of council, the men of tongue and letter and coin, have drifted from her like tide from a shore. She reads their absences the way she once read their loyalty. Grey Worm remains. Missandei's memory remains. Little else. Jon comes to her because he must. He climbs the steps of the Red Keep not as a conqueror, but as a man, carrying an offer he does not fully believe she will take. He finds her before the melted ruin where a throne once stood, and for a long moment neither speaks. "They would make me king," he says. "It is not a boast. It is an apology." "They would make you king," she answers, "because they are afraid of me." He does not deny it. That is the cruelty of it, and the honesty. He offers her the North to rule as its queen, offers her a place at his side, offers her a peace built on shared blood rather than shared fire. He lays each of these before her the way a man lays down cards he already knows will lose. She listens, and in her listening he sees the thing that makes reconciliation impossible. It is not hatred, it is destiny. She has believed for so long, through so much loss, that she alone was chosen to break the wheel that grinds the small beneath the great, that she cannot now conceive of a world in which she is not its center. To accept his hand is to accept that her whole life has been prologue to another's reign. Her pride will not permit it. Her vision will not permit it. She was not born to kneel in the North. She was born to sit here, in this hall, and she will not be moved from it by a nephew's mercy. "You would give me a kingdom of snow," she says softly, "and keep the wheel turning under a kinder name." He does not finish his answer. He does not need to. He leaves her there with Drogon and her unsullied, a queen sovereign over a single keep, and the realm already turning past her like water past a stone. The great houses gather in the days that follow, summoned to a council that has no precedent and no authority save the naked fact that someone must decide. They come from every corner of a broken land, Northmen who remember Jon as their king, Reach Lords and Storm Lords who remember Daenerys as their liberator, River Lords and Westermen, and the survivors of the Vale, each carrying grievances centuries deep, and among them, voices demanding not a choice between two claimants at all, but a new thing entirely, a council of lords, a breaking of the old inheritance, an end to the very notion of a blood right to rule. The chamber is bitterly divided. Every faction sees its own survival in a different outcome, and every faction is armed. Tyrion, permitted to speak, does not argue Jon's blood. He argues the alternative. He lays out, piece by piece, the shape of the war that comes if the realm splits along its old fault lines. The generation of children who will grow up burying their fathers. The small folk who will starve while great men settle old scores. He does not promise them a perfect king. He offers them the only king both North and South can accept without breaking. A man of two houses, a man who spared a city, a man whose very existence is a bridge between the parts of Westeros that have spent 1,000 years at each other's throats. The argument is not won by passion. It is won by exhaustion, and by fear, and by the slow recognition passing lord to lord that Tyrion is right, that there is no other road that does not run through blood. One by one the calculations resolve. One by one the great houses see that a Targaryen, who is also a Stark, is not a compromise they must swallow, but the only peace they will ever be offered. The chamber goes quiet. Eyes turn toward Jon, who has not spoken, who has let others speak for him, who sits with the weight of what he did not want settling upon his shoulders like snow. And in the Red Keep, alone with her dragon, Daenerys learns that the council has begun to say a name that is not hers. What if the war for a throne came down not to armies, not to lords, not to the slow arithmetic of loyalty measured in bannermen, but to two people who shared blood and could not share a crown? What if the last battle of the last dragons was fought not out of hatred, but out of a grief that neither could escape? This is where the calculations end and the fire begins. The negotiations do not collapse in fury. They collapse in silence, which is worse. Tyrion goes to her one final time, climbing the ruined stair to the chamber where Daenerys sits, and he lays before her the only bargain the realm will accept. She keeps her titles, she keeps her freedom, she keeps her life, she keeps everything except the one thing she has crossed the world to claim. And Daenerys, who has burned her enemies and freed the enslaved and named herself the breaker of chains, listens to the terms and understands what they are. Not a compromise, a dispossession dressed in courtesy. She has spent her whole life being told the throne is not hers, and now the men who told her so are offering her a comfortable version of the same theft. She refuses. She does not shout. She simply says that the throne is hers by right of blood and by right of fire, and that no council of frightened lords will teach her to surrender it. Tyrion bows his head. He has argued his last argument. He goes, and so it comes to the sky. Rhaegal rises over King's Landing at dawn, and Jon rides him not as a conqueror, but as a man walking towards something he has already lived once and never wished to live again. Deep in the marrow of him, Daemon's memory stirs, cold and precise. He knows this feeling. He knows the way the wind cuts at a great height, knows the terrible intimacy of a dragon duel, knows that such battles do not end with both riders alive. He died this way before, in a sky above a lake, tumbling through the air with a blade in his hand, and his enemy's dragon closing its jaws around him. The knowledge does not frighten him. It grieves him, because he understands. with the grim certainty of a man who has been here before, exactly how this must end, and he has spent every hour trying to find a road that does not run through that ending. Drogon comes for him out of the low clouds, black against the gray, and Daenerys upon his back is no longer negotiating. She is beyond words now. Jon does not attack, he evades. He uses Daemon's old cunning, the maneuvers learned in a life that ended in flame, banking Rhaegal beneath Drogon's line of fire, breaking away before the larger dragon can bring his full weight to bear. He is not trying to kill her. He is trying to exhaust her, to wound Drogon without slaying him, to force the fight to a place where she must break off, must retreat, must live. Every turn he takes is a plea disguised as a strategy. Land, he thinks, willing it across the empty air between them. Land and live, and let this be over. But rage does not calculate. Rage does not measure. Daenerys drives Drogon into him again and again, and each pass is closer, and each blast of fire scorches nearer to the wing, and Jon understands that she will not stop, that she cannot stop, that she has decided the throne is worth her death, and perhaps his too. He tries once more to disable rather than destroy. He drives Rhaegal in low, aiming to cripple the wing, to bring Drogon down alive onto the broken rooftops below. And in that moment, Daenerys turns Drogon to meet him head-on, jaws open, holding nothing back, forcing the choice she knows he does not want to make. There is no more room for mercy. There is only the space of a heartbeat and the certainty of what happens if he hesitates. Daemon's memory answers before Jon's grief can argue. Rhaegal's fire and Drogon's fire meet in the air between them, and for an instant, the two dragons are one blaze, and then it is done. Drogon shrieks and falls, wounded but living, spiraling down toward the earth, and Daenerys falls with him, thrown from her seat in the violence of that final pass, tumbling small and dark through the empty morning, down and down toward the ruin of the city she came to save. Jon does not remember guiding Rhaegal to the ground. He is simply there, in the shattered courtyard, running across broken stone, and she is lying among the rubble with the light already leaving her. He gathers her up. He holds his aunt in his arms, this woman he barely knew and might have loved and could not follow, and he watches the fire go out of her eyes. She looks at him. She sees him. Whatever she means to say, she does not have the breath to say it. And Jon, who wears the memory of a man who once held the ashes of everything he loved, feels the old grief rise up in him whole and undiminished across the centuries. He has been here before. He knows this hollow. He knows that a throne always demands the blood of one's own kin, that it is never bought cheaply, that the crown he did not want has now cost him the last of his house. There is no triumph in the courtyard. There is a man on his knees in the wreckage of a city, holding a dead queen, while above him, the two dragons that remain circle and keen, and do not understand why one of their riders will not rise again. The lords in the council chamber do not yet know it is finished. The realm does not yet know. But the sky over King's Landing is empty of battle now, and the smoke is thinning, and word is already climbing the stair toward the men who spoke a name that was not hers. Jon holds Daenerys a while longer. He is not ready to let her go, but the throne he never wanted is his, and the reckoning of what that means has only just begun. What if a throne could be won and mourned in the same breath? What if the man who spent 2 lifetimes reaching for it discovered, in the moment of grasping it, that his hands were empty of everything but the crown itself? These are the questions that hang over King's Landing in the days that follow, and no answer comes easily, because there is no easy answer to be had. The lords gather because they must. A realm cannot govern itself, and a throne cannot sit vacant while ambitious men circle its emptiness, like the dragons circling the smoke. So they come. They come from the Reach with their harvests and their pride. They come from the Vale with their mountain arrogance intact. They come from the Riverlands, exhausted, from Dorne, calculating, from the Stormlands, uncertain of which way the wind now blows. They fill a chamber that still smells of ash, and they look at one another, and each of them is running the same arithmetic in his head. Who is left? That is the question beneath every whispered conversation. Who is left with a claim that will not tear the realm apart the moment it is spoken aloud? There is a Targaryen. There is only one. He carries the blood of the dragon in his veins, undeniable, confirmed by the very beasts that answered his call in the sky above them. He carries something else too, something the small folk understand, in a way the lords are only beginning to grasp. They love him. They love him not as they love Daenerys, with the fervor of the liberated, but with the quieter, stubborner love of people who have watched a man ride north into the dark and come back alive. He held the wall. He rode a dragon against the dead. He knelt for no crown and asked for no glory. And in a world grown weary of men who grasp, that reluctance is worth more than any army. The lords understand this. They understand it the way a chess player understands that a certain move is forced, that the board permits no other option, and so the offer is made. Jon does not want it. This is the truth that no one in the chamber can quite believe, and it is the truth that makes the offer irresistible. The Stark in him recoils from the very shape of the thing. He remembers Ned Stark's face, grave and northern and honest, telling a boy that a man who wants power is a man to be watched. He remembers the vows he swore in a cold cell of the Night's Watch, vows he broke and vows he kept, and vows that meant nothing in the end. He remembers Winterfell, the wolves, the Godswood, the sense of belonging to a place rather than to a title. But there is another voice. There is the voice that has waited across 2 lifetimes, patient as stone, cold as the sea beyond Dragonstone. Daemon Targaryen never forgot the throne. Daemon Targaryen circled it his whole first life. The second son, the sword of the realm, the rogue prince who watched lesser men sit the seat he coveted. He schemed for it. He killed for it. He died 100 leagues from it, in the waters of a haunted lake, and he carried that hunger with him into the dark and out the other side into the body of a boy in the snow. Now it is his. Now, at last, it is his. And the terrible symmetry of it is that he no longer wants it the way he once did, because the wanting has cost him the one thing he had not expected to love. He accepts. The word is quiet. The word changes everything. He takes the throne as a Targaryen king, by right of blood and by right of conquest, because both are true and both are necessary. But he will not be a Targaryen king alone. This is the condition he sets. And he sets it not as supplication, but as decree. And the lords learn quickly that this soft-spoken northerner has an iron beneath the softness that they did not anticipate. He will keep his Stark counselors. He will honor the old gods in the same breath as the new. He will be a bridge, he tells them, between a north that has never trusted the south and a south that has never respected the north, and he will bind the 2 halves of a fractured realm with his own divided nature. They do not fully understand him. How could they? He is 2 men wearing one face, a wolf and a dragon sharing a single heart, and the reconciliation he preaches to them is the reconciliation he has been forced to make within himself. Above the ruined city, one dragon remains that will not come to him. Drogon has flown. He carried Daenerys away in his claws, north and east, toward Valyria, or toward nowhere at all, toward whatever destination a grieving beast chooses when its rider will not wake. And the lords, being practical men who see a monster loose in the world, begin to speak of the hunt, of trackers, of the danger a masterless dragon poses to villages and roads, and the fragile peace they are only beginning to construct. Jon forbids it. He forbids it with a flatness that permits no argument, and when they press him, when they speak of prudence and precedent and the safety of the realm, he silences them with a single look. Let the dragon grieve, he tells them. No hunt will follow it. No spear will be raised against it. It has lost what I have lost, and it deserves what I do not, the mercy of being left alone. He does not say the rest. He does not tell them that this is penance, that every day Drogon lives is a debt he pays toward the aunt he could not save, the queen he loved and doubted and failed. He does not say that a part of him hopes the dragon will find its way to some far place and never return, so that he might grieve without the sky forever reminding him of the price. He says none of it. He does not need to. And in the silence that follows, the lords begin, at last, to bend the knee. What does a man do when he already knows how his house will fall? He watches for it. He waits for the first crack, the first whisper, the first slow poison of suspicion that turns brother against brother and cousin against cousin. And then, if he is wise, if he has lived and died once already, he does not reach for the sword. He reaches for something slower and far more durable. Jon Snow, seated upon a throne of blackened blades that had scarred better men than him, understood this in a way no living king could. He had worn the shape of Daemon Targaryen. He had ridden that prince's rage across the stepstones and the riverlands. He had died in the waters of the Green Fork with a knife in his skull, and Aemon's cold laughter dissolving into the dark. And he had learned, too late, the lesson that had eluded him for the entirety of that violent life. It was not the enemy who broke the dragon. It was the dragon itself. It was pride. It was haste. It was the endless, gnawing certainty that every hand not currently holding yours was reaching for a blade. So he began, quietly, to do the opposite of everything he had once done. The lords who had opposed him expected the axe. They came to the Red Keep with the stiff, resigned dignity of men who have already composed their final words, who have kissed their wives goodbye and warned their sons to keep their heads down and their oaths flexible. They knelt, they waited, and Jon pardoned them, not with warmth, for warmth would have seemed like weakness, and not with contempt, for contempt breeds martyrs. He pardoned them with the flat, businesslike calm of a man settling accounts, restoring their lands, confirming their titles, and sending them home to think, on the long ride north and west and east, about why they still had heads to think with. Daemon would have burned them. Jon remembered the temptation of it, the clean and satisfying arithmetic of removing an enemy from the board. But dead enemies leave sons, and sons remember, and the memory of a slaughtered father is the sturdiest foundation any rebellion ever laid. Better a living lord who owes you his life than a dead one whose blood becomes a rallying cry. Better mercy that binds than cruelty that scatters. He named Tyrion Lannister his hand, and the choice surprised the court less than it should have. Here was a man who had served 3 monarchs and survived them all, who understood coin and grain and the small, unglamorous machinery by which realms are actually held together. Jon did not need a hand who agreed with him. He needed one who would argue, who would find the flaw in the plan before the plan found its own grave. Tyrion, for his part, studied the young king across the width of the small council chamber, and felt the old, familiar itch of a man who suspects there is more inside another skull than the skull has any right to contain. He said nothing. He watched. He had learned that watching was the only sport worth playing at that table. Then came the North, and the matter of Sansa. She did not ask. That was the thing Jon respected most, and the thing that told him what he already meant to do was correct. She did not petition, did not maneuver, did not send emissaries to hint at the North's long grievances and longer memory. She simply arrived and stood and let the fact of the North stand with her, unspoken and immovable. 30,000 men had marched south for the living and returned to find themselves subjects of a southern king in a southern city that had never once ridden north to save them. Jon named her Wardeness. He granted the North an autonomy no crown had permitted since Torrhen Stark knelt before the first Aegon. It kept its own levies, its own justice, its own long silences. And the southern lords who muttered that this was madness, that this was the first stone pulled from a wall that would bring the realm down around them, did not understand what Jon understood. A North that felt owned would break away the moment the crown looked weak. A North that felt trusted would fight to keep the crown strong, because the crown had become, at last, something worth keeping. He was not surrendering the North, he was purchasing it with the only currency it had ever valued, which was respect. Sansa understood the transaction perfectly. She inclined her head, and in the small tightening at the corner of her mouth, Jon read the whole of her calculation, the profit and the price, and the leash so subtly woven that it would take her years to notice it was there. Marriage would come next, he knew. Land, debt, the quiet, patient architecture of obligation. She would rule the North, and the North would rule itself, and both of them would answer, in the end, to a throne that had given them everything they wanted, precisely so that it might never have to take anything by force. The plotters came last. They always did. Jon's network had grown in the shadows of the war, a web of stewards and maesters and second sons who traded in whispers, and through it the names arrived one by one. Old lords, careful lords, men who had smiled at his coronation and written letters that same night, sounding out allies, testing the depth of the discontent, measuring the young king for a coffin. He did not have them killed. He summoned them, singly, and he showed each one a single piece of their own correspondence laid upon the table between them, and he watched the color drain from a dozen faces in a dozen private rooms. Then he offered them daughters and nephews to marry into houses loyal to the crown. He offered them lands that came bundled with debts, payable only to men who answered to Tyrion. He wove them into the fabric so tightly that to cut themselves free would mean cutting their own throats. One old lord, a reach man with eyes like wet flint, looked up from the letter that named his treason and asked, very softly, what the king intended to do with it now. Jon slid the parchment toward the candle and let one corner begin to blacken and curl. What if the hardest war a king ever fought was the one that began the moment the fighting stopped? The Lord watched the letter burn, and in that small dying flame, he read the shape of the reign to come, and he understood that mercy and menace had become the same instrument in these young hands. He left the room a loyal man, or near enough to it, and Jon turned his mind from the treasons of the great to the hunger of the small. King's Landing lay broken beneath him. He walked it himself, not from a litter, but on his own 2 feet, through streets where ash still gathered in the corners, and the smell of the dead had soaked so deep into the stone that no rain could scour it out. Whole districts had burned. Whole families had gone into the pits during the long dark, and the survivors watched their new king pass with the flat, exhausted eyes of people who had learned to expect nothing from crowns. He counted them as he walked. He counted the roofless houses, the wells fouled by corpses, the children too thin to cry, and he made a decision that every advisor around him thought unwise, and that he knew to be the only thing that mattered. He fed them first. Before a single lord received a grant of restored land, before a single sept was rebuilt in marble, the granaries opened and the wagons rolled, and bread reached the hands that had not held bread in a season. Tyrion warned him that the nobility would grumble, that men of ancient blood expected to be rewarded before rabble were fed. Jon heard him out. Then he asked a simple question. When the crown is threatened, who dies for it first? Not the lords in their high halls, the small folk in the streets, who take up spears because they are told to, or because they have nothing left to lose. He understood, with the cold clarity of a man who had lived 2 lives, that a throne rests not on the men who kneel closest to it, but on the vast anonymous weight of those who never enter the room at all. Feed them, and they remember. Starve them, and they remember longer. So they remembered. In the alehouses and the fish markets, they spoke of the king who ate what his people ate, who had been seen lifting fallen timber with his own scarred hands, who paid masons in coin rather than promises. Loyalty grew in that soil the way nothing else could grow it, slow and deep-rooted, and impossible to buy back once given away. He was building something beneath the surface of the realm, a foundation of gratitude that no rival claimant could ever undermine, and he was building it one loaf at a time. North of everything, at the edge of the world, another wound waited to be closed. The wall had guarded the realm for 8,000 years against a threat that was now ended, its purpose spent, its garrison a relic of a war already won. And beyond it lived a people the realm had named enemies for 1,000 years, the free folk, who had bled beside the living against the dead, and earned something that could not be unearned. Jon rode to them himself. He offered the gift, that broad abandoned band of land below the wall, empty of lords and thick with ghosts, and he offered it not as conquest but as home. They would keep their ways, choose their own leaders in their own fashion, but they would be subjects of the Iron Throne, and the frontier that had divided the continent would dissolve into farmland and quiet. Their war chiefs argued, old hatreds do not surrender easily, and there were those among them who had lost fathers to southern steel and would rather die free in the cold than live kneeling in the warm. Jon did not command them. He reasoned with them in the plain, hard language they respected, laying out the arithmetic of survival, and where reason failed, he let the shadow of his dragon fall across the frozen ground until even the proudest understood the choice they were being offered. Peace, or the memory of peace, refused. They took it, 1,000-year wound closed over in a single season, and the North had a settled border for the first time since the raising of the wall. But a realm is a thing of many edges, and while he mended the North, the South began to test him. Dorne sent no army. Dorne sent words, which were sharper. Their new prince wrote of the Martell way, of a people never truly conquered, of independence deferred through generations that might now be claimed while the crown was young and the realm exhausted. And from the salt and stone of the Iron Islands came a rougher demand entirely, the Ironborn declaring for the old ways, for a kingdom of their own, beneath a driftwood crown, reaving already in the western seas, as if to prove the point in blood. Jon read both letters in the same hour. He did not answer them the same way. To Dorne he offered a marriage and a seat on the small council. and a measure of self-rule dressed in the language of ancient privilege, giving the prince everything a proud man needed to save face, and nothing that weakened the crown's true grip. Concession, precisely measured, extended with an open hand. To the Iron Islands he offered fire. He flew west himself, and the reaving fleets that had burned villages along the Reach coast found the sky above them filled with wings, and the men who had laughed at the notion of a mainland king learned in a single afternoon what the notion now meant. Balance. Always balance. The soft word for those who could be won, the hard flame for those who understood only strength, and the wisdom, hard-earned across 2 lifetimes, to know which was which. He was keeping the realm whole through the same instrument that had raised him to its summit, and he knew the work was far from finished, because even as the Ironborn survivors dragged themselves ashore to swear new oaths, a raven was already winging toward the capital bearing a message he had not yet read, sealed in Dornish red, and its contents would decide whether the peace he had purchased would hold. What if a man could win every war and still lose the quiet hours after? The Dornish letter, when it came, proved to be no threat at all, but a courtesy, a pledge of continued loyalty from a lord who had watched the Ironborn burn and drawn the obvious conclusion. Jon read it twice and set it down, and felt none of the relief such news should have brought. The wars were the easy part. The wars had answers, and the answers came on wings, and a man who had lived 2 lifetimes of conquest knew the shape of every battlefield before he stood upon it. It was the stillness that undid him. It was the hour past midnight in the solar. The candle burned to a stub. The maps rolled away, when there was nothing left to conquer, and only the 2 lives inside him to reconcile. He confided in Sam, because Sam was the only one who could hear such a confession and not flinch. He told him that some mornings he woke and reached for a woman who had been dead for centuries, a wife burned upon a pyre in a life Jon Snow had never lived. He told him that when he closed his eyes, he could taste the smoke of a war fought over a throne of a different age, and that when he opened them, he saw Daenerys falling, the small weight of her against his chest, the dagger he had driven home. 2 griefs, 1 heart to hold them both. He did not know, he said quietly, where Daemon ended and where he himself began, and he feared that the man who had once burned a boy to feed his own ambition still lived somewhere behind his eyes, waiting. Sam did not offer comfort of the cheap kind. He was too honest for that. He said only that a man who feared he would repeat old sins was already a different man than the one who had committed them, and that the fear itself was the proof. Guilt, he said, was a leash. Daemon Targaryen had worn no such leash. Jon Snow did. Hold to it, Sam told him. When the fire calls, remember that you can feel this. The dead cannot. The test came, as tests do, before Jon had finished learning the lesson. A minor lord in the Riverlands, a man of small holdings and smaller vision, raised his banners and his voice together, declaring to any who would listen that the king upon the Iron Throne was a kinslayer twice over, a bastard wearing borrowed silver, no true Targaryen, and no true king. The words were clever. They were the kind of words that could spread like fire in dry grass, because they carried within them a seed of truth wrapped around a lie. Jon had killed his own blood. That much could not be denied. The rest was poison, and poison spreads. The old instinct woke in him at once. He knew where the man's keep sat. He knew how long the flight would take, how quickly Rhaegal could reduce those stone walls to a scattering of glowing rubble, how thoroughly a single afternoon of fire would silence every whisper of rebellion for a generation. The calculation was complete before he had finished reading the report. It was the correct military answer. It was Daemon's answer. He did not give it. Instead, he summoned the man to the capital under guarantee of safe passage, and he built a trial. Not a mummer's trial with the verdict written before the first word, but a true accounting, open to any lord who wished to attend, with witnesses called and evidence laid bare before the whole assembled court. He let the rebel speak first, and speak fully, and empty his quiver of accusations until nothing remained. Then, one by one, the truth was set against each charge. The circumstances of Daenerys's death, testified to by those who had stood in the ruin of the throne room. The lineage, confirmed by the maester who had kept the records, and the septon who had witnessed the quiet marriage of a prince and a lady of the north. The rebel's own letters, purchased for coin from a foreign power, read aloud in his own hand. The man had come to the capital expecting to be burned, so that his death might make a martyr of him. Jon understood this. That was precisely why he refused to grant it. A king who burns his accusers proves them right. A king who answers them with justice, patient and public and irrefutable, strips them of the only weapon they ever held. When the trial ended, the rebellion had no cause left to stand upon, and the Lord was not a martyr but a proven liar, and the difference between those two fates was the difference between a rising and a footnote. He walked out of that hall with more true authority than any dragon could have given him, and the dragon had not left the ground. But Jon knew the deeper truth beneath the victory, and it was this that occupied him in the nights that followed. A throne that rested upon a single dragon's temper was a throne built upon sand. Dragons died. Kings went mad. The whole bloody history he carried inside him was a chronicle of what happened when absolute power was placed in the hands of one flawed and mortal creature, and no wall was built to contain it. He would not leave that inheritance behind him. So he assembled a small council drawn from every corner of the realm, north and south, riverlands and stormlands, Dorne and the Reach and the Vale, so that no single region could claim the crown as its own, and no single voice could whisper unopposed into a king's ear. And then he did the thing that no Targaryen before him had ever contemplated. He set his own power in chains of law, codifying with his maesters and his council a body of statute that limited the crown's right to burn, to murder, to seize a life without trial and evidence, and the judgment of peers. He was binding the dragon. He was binding himself, and every king who would come after. The council watched him draft it, and one among them, an old lord of the Reach with cautious eyes, asked the question aloud. Why would a king willingly shackle his own hand? Why would any man who held the fire of dragons in his blood and the loyalty of half a continent behind his banner choose to build a cage around his own throne? The old lord of the Reach asked it plainly, without malice, only the honest confusion of a man who had lived his whole life believing that power was something to be grasped and never surrendered. Jon did not answer him at once. He set down his quill. He looked at the parchment, at the words drying there in his own careful hand, and he thought of two lives, two deaths, two chronicles of ruin that had taught him the same lesson from opposite ends. A king who cannot be stopped will, in time, do a thing that cannot be undone. He had been that king. He had watched other kings become that king, and so he said only this, that a crown worth keeping was a crown that could survive the man who wore it. The old lord considered this. He did not agree, not entirely, but he did not object again either, and that silence was its own kind of victory. The eggs came later, in the deep months of that first settled winter, drawn up from the ruined vaults beneath Dragonstone, where the sea had crept in through fissures in the black stone. 3 of them, cool to the touch and heavy as river stones, their scales dulled by centuries but unbroken, unspoiled, holding within them the sleeping promise of fire. A lesser man would have hatched them at once. A lesser man would have hurried, would have craved the sight of dragons in the sky above his keep, the raw and intoxicating proof that the old power had returned to his hand. Jon did not hurry. He remembered too well what dragons became when they were treated as weapons and nothing more, when they were bred to burn and taught that the world was theirs to blacken. So he built first. Before ever an egg was warmed, he raised a stewardship, a body of keepers and handlers and maesters sworn to the beasts and to the law both, men and women, charged not with making dragons into instruments of conquest, but with raising them as guardians of the whole realm, bound by the same statutes that bound the crown itself. A dragon that answered to no law was a dragon that would one day answer to no king. He had seen that truth written in ash across 2 histories, and he would not see it written again. The marriage was arranged with the same cold patience that governed everything else he did. There were offers, of course. There were always offers when a king held an unwed hand, and each great house pressed forward a daughter or a niece or a cousin, each seeing in the match the chance to lace their own blood into the royal line and rise above their rivals. He weighed them the way he weighed everything, not by the beauty of the woman or the wealth of her house, but by the shape of the realm that would follow. A bride from the Reach would make the Reach overmighty. A bride from the north would set the south to grumbling that the crown had been captured by ice. A bride from any single power would tilt the careful balance he had spent so long constructing, and the whole point of the thing had been that no faction should ever again feel it owned the king. So he chose differently. He chose a woman respected in every corner of Westeros and beholden to none of it. A woman whose wisdom in matters of governance had already reached him through report and correspondence long before her hand was ever discussed. A partner rather than a prize. Her counsel would prove worth more to his reign than any army her house might have brought. And when in the fullness of time she bore him a son, healthy and squalling and unmistakably his, the last low murmur of fear that had haunted the realm since the war's end finally fell silent. There was an heir. There was a line. The succession, that ancient poison that had killed more Targaryens than any sword ever forged, was answered before it could ever be asked. But the crowning work, the thing that would outlast the dragons and the marriage and the king himself, was the council. Not the small council of advisors that every ruler kept, but a great council, a permanent body summoned into being by royal decree and given a standing it had never before possessed. Representatives came. The North sent its own, hard-eyed and plain-spoken, men who had followed him once and trusted him still. The South sent lords and ladies wrapped in the finery of their houses, wary and calculating and watchful for advantage. And the free folk sent theirs too, chosen by their own custom in their own way, walking into the halls of the realm as men and women with a voice in its governance rather than enemies, to be walled out beyond the world's edge. He seated them together. He gave them a chamber and a charter and a right to be heard. And he did the thing that Daenerys had only ever spoken of in the language of dreams and fire. He broke the wheel, not by burning the great houses to cinders, not by melting their castles and salting their fields, but by binding them into a structure where their rivalries could exhaust themselves in words and votes and treaties rather than in armies and ashes. The wheel had turned on the axis of a single throne, and now that throne answered to something larger than itself. The first Great Council was not yet done drafting its founding charter when a rider came up the King's Road in the gray light of dawn, his horse lathered and his cloak stiff with frost, bearing a sealed message from beyond the wall. The steward took it. He read the name upon the seal, and he went at once to find the king, because the name upon that seal was one that no living man was supposed to be able to write. The message, in the end, was nothing to fear. It bore the mark of a man of the free folk. A scribe taught his letters in the long peace, and it carried only a request for grain to see a northern village through a hard winter. The steward had misread the omen. There was no ghost writing from beyond the grave, only a people who had once known no words at all, now learning to ask for help rather than to take it. Jon read the letter twice, and then he set it down, and something in his chest loosened that had been drawn tight for the better part of 2 lifetimes. This was what he had built, not a dominion of terror, a place where the last enemies of the realm had become its distant citizens, close enough to write, welcome enough to be answered. He was old now. The years had settled upon him the way frost settles on stone, gradually, without cruelty, until the whole surface is changed and the thing beneath remains unmoved. His hair had gone white, and the fire that had once burned so hot in his blood had banked to a steady, patient warmth. He no longer paced the corridors of his own mind rehearsing betrayals. He no longer measured every man who knelt to him for the angle at which a knife might enter. The habits of 2 suspicious lives had quieted, because the world he had made no longer required them. Consider the man Daemon Targaryen had been, who had wanted the throne so badly that wanting it had killed him. Consider the boy Jon Snow had been, who had never wanted the throne at all, and who had died for that refusal upon the daggers of men he called brothers. 2 hungers, one for power and one for peace, one for glory and one for goodness, and each had destroyed the man who carried it because it stood alone. But bind ambition to honor, and the ambition ceases to devour. Bind honor to ambition, and the honor ceases to be helpless. That was the alchemy of him, the thing no maester could have predicted, and no prophecy had named. He had needed both. Westeros had needed both. The lords assembled in the great hall on a morning of pale spring light, and Jon named his heir before them all. The choosing had not been made by blood alone, though blood ran in it, nor by ambition, though ambition had been weighed. He had chosen the one who understood the thing he had spent a reign proving, that the Iron Throne was not a prize to be seized, but a burden to be carried well, that a king who rules for himself rules for a season, and a king who rules for the realm rules for an age. He set the crown's future not upon a single head, but upon a structure of law and counsel and custom that no single head could easily undo. The wheel he had broken would stay broken. He had made certain of it in the patient way a man makes certain of a wall, stone by stone, until no storm can throw it down. He does not speak of himself when he addresses the lords. He speaks of them, and of their children, and of the winters yet to come. He does not remind them of the wars he ended. He does not need to. The peace is its own argument, and every man in that hall has grown old enough inside it to have forgotten what came before. In the last years, he flew. Rhaegal was old too, his green scales dulled to the color of moss on ancient stone, his wing beats slower than they had been. But the dragon remembered the sky, and so did the man, and together they rose above a country that neither of them any longer needed to conquer. Jon looked down upon it as a father looks upon a sleeping child. He saw villages where there had been ash. He saw fields heavy with grain where armies had once trampled the earth to mud. He saw castles rebuilt, their banners bright and unburned, and he saw roads busy with carts rather than with columns of the dying. He saw the wall standing quiet in the north, no longer a boundary against horror, but a monument to a threat that had passed. Its gates open, its watch turned to keeping records and welcoming travelers rather than counting the dead. He gave the daily weight of rule to his heir well before the end, not because his mind had failed, but because he wished to see the transition hold while he still lived to steady it. A king who dies with the crown clutched in his fist leaves a scramble behind him. A king who sets it down gently, who watches another lift it and finds that the realm does not tremble, has done the last and hardest thing that power can do. He had spent his ambition entirely, and what it had purchased was a peace that would not die when he did. His passing, when it came, was quiet. There was no fire. There was no war of succession, no dragon burning dragon, no cousin's dagger in the dark, no cycle turning once more upon the axis of a coveted seat. The blood of the dragon had spent 2 lifetimes teaching itself that lesson, and at the last it had learned. He died in his bed, in winter, with the snow falling soft beyond the windows, and the men who watched him go said afterward that he had smiled, though no one knew at what. They remembered him strangely, in the years that followed, not simply as Jon Snow, the bastard who had never sought a crown, not simply as Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince reborn to finish what his first life had left undone. They remembered him as the one who had joined the two, the dragon's hunger and the wolf's honor, and had proven the thing that all the conquerors before him had never understood. The Iron Throne had never needed another conqueror. It had waited, cold and sharp and terrible, through all the burning centuries, for someone who understood that what it had always needed was simply a ruler, and at the very last, it found one. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. And if you'd like to explore even more stories, our Lorekeeper members unlock a brand new exclusive alternate history every single week. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then,